She had answered every question thrown at her for 7 years, every hostile committee, every adversarial interview, every ambush from across the aisle. She had developed, across those 7 years, the specific political fluency of someone who has been in enough difficult rooms that difficult rooms no longer feel difficult. They feel like opportunity. And then Marco Rubio placed a single FEC filing on the table, read 4 lines from it out loud, and asked where 50% of the money went. She froze, not metaphorically, not in the political sense of losing the argument while still producing words. She froze the way a person freezes when the question being asked is one they have spent considerable energy ensuring would never be asked in a room where the asking has consequences. Good evening, everyone. As someone who has spent decades watching the machinery of campaign finance intersect with the machinery of political accountability, who has sat in those oversight rooms and watched the distance between fundraising promises and documented outcomes become the most consequential gap in American politics, I can tell you that what unfolded in the Senate Finance Subcommittee on Campaign Accountability last Thursday was not a routine hearing. It was not a procedural exercise. It was the moment that a 7-year fundraising narrative built on the specific moral authority of grassroots small-dollar democracy met the one thing it had never encountered in 7 years. A man with the actual filing, the actual numbers, and the actual patience to read them out loud in a room where the reading had consequences. And if you want to understand how that freeze was built, from the very first moment Rubio opened the session to the specific second when the words stopped coming, stay with me. Because the architecture of this particular accountability moment is unlike anything I have covered in this seat. Let me place you inside that room before a single word was exchanged. The Senate Finance Subcommittee on Campaign Accountability had convened this particular session as a hearing on transparency and political action committee fundraising and the relationship between donor solicitation language and documented fund deployment. The official subject was technical enough that under ordinary circumstances, it would have drawn coverage from 2 financial journalists and a campaign finance attorney watching the feed from a laptop in an airport. But this particular morning, the hearing room was at capacity 2 hours before the gavel fell. Because the previous week, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's office had released a statement confirming she would appear voluntarily as a witness to, in her spokesperson's exact language, defend the integrity of small-dollar grassroots fundraising against what her office characterized as a politically motivated attempt to criminalize progressive campaign finance structures. Washington read that statement with the specific attention paid to what political offices say when they are trying to control the framing of something before the framing is set by someone else. And the thing that the statement did not address, the thing that it carefully and deliberately did not mention, was the specific FEC filing that had been the subject of a preliminary inquiry letter sent to her campaign committee 14 months earlier. A letter that had been acknowledged and responded to with a general statement of compliance and had not been publicly discussed since. The hearing room held 200 observers. Every seat in the gallery was filled. The press section had been expanded by 12 additional positions to accommodate the overflow of credentialed journalists who had requested access. Television cameras occupied the full length of the back wall. Political correspondents who normally covered the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve had reassigned themselves to this room for this morning specifically. At the right end of the curved dais, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida arrived 8 minutes before the formal start time. He brought 1 aide, 1 legal advisor, and a manila folder that was noticeably thin. Not the substantial, multi-tabbed binder that typically signals extensive preparation for a contentious hearing. A thin folder with a small number of pages inside it, the kind of folder that signals not comprehensive preparation across many subjects, but focused, precise preparation on one subject specifically. He set it on the table in front of him and did not open it. He folded his hands on top of it. His reading glasses were already on. He did not review notes. He did not consult his aide. He sat with the closed folder and the folded hands and the particular stillness of someone who has everything he needs and is in no hurry to use it. Across the witness table, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez arrived with the energy that 7 years of national political celebrity produces in a person. The specific, practiced confidence of someone who has been in more contested rooms than most politicians occupy in an entire career and has developed an intuitive relationship with the dynamics of those rooms that functions almost like a sixth sense. She set her materials on the witness table. She adjusted her microphone. She looked at the gallery and at the cameras and at the dais with the rapid, comprehensive assessment of someone taking inventory of a space she intends to command. Her eyes moved to Rubio's end of the dais. She noted the thin folder. Her expression did not change visibly. But the aide seated to her left, a young woman who had worked for her office for 3 years and who knew the specific vocabulary of the Congresswoman's nonverbal communication in high-stakes settings, wrote something on her notepad immediately after that glance. Whatever she wrote, she underlined it. Subscribe to this channel right now if this is your first time here. Because what I am about to walk you through required 8 hours of transcript reconstruction, FEC database research, and frame-by-frame review of the broadcast footage. And you will not want to miss the moment when that thin folder opens. The subcommittee chairman called the hearing to order and gave the witness the floor for her opening statement. She took it with the immediate, complete ownership of someone who has been waiting for this specific moment and has prepared for it with the thoroughness that 7 years of high-profile political combat produces. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she began, her voice carrying the particular quality of controlled clarity that has become her signature in these settings. I want to begin by naming what this hearing is actually about, because I think transparency, which is the stated subject of this proceeding, should begin here at this table. She looked at the dais without focusing on any specific member of it. This hearing is about the decision by certain members of this body to use the machinery of congressional oversight as a political weapon against fundraising structures that have fundamentally democratized American political participation. The grassroots small-dollar fundraising model that my campaign and campaigns like mine have developed did not exist at this scale 20 years ago. It was built by millions of ordinary Americans who gave $5 and $25 and $50 because they believed that their money could compete with the unlimited dark money that has historically dominated our political system. She paused for the specific duration that she uses when she wants the previous sentence to fully arrive before the next one departs. Those donors deserve to know that the oversight mechanisms of this government are being used to protect their investment in democracy, not to attack the political structures they built with their own small contributions. And I am here today to make sure that the record reflects the truth about how that money has been raised, how it has been deployed, and why the attacks on grassroots fundraising structures represent a fundamental threat to the democratization of American political participation. She turned a page. I have been fundraising in this model for 7 years. I have raised over $200 million from small-dollar donors across the country. Every filing has been submitted on time. Every disclosure has been made. My campaign committee and affiliated political action committees have operated in full compliance with federal election law, as documented in every FEC filing and confirmed in the preliminary inquiry response submitted 14 months ago. She settled back. I welcome your questions. The gallery responded with the charged, contained energy of people who have come to watch something specific happen and believe they have just seen the first move of it made in the way they hoped it would be made. A reporter in the second row was writing with the rapid, flowing handwriting of someone capturing something they want preserved verbatim. 2 members of the gallery were nodding with the specific conviction of people who already believed what they just heard and are gratified to hear it said aloud in this setting. If you have ever watched someone walk into a contested room and establish the terms of the contest before the other side has spoken a single word, hit that like button right now, because that is exactly what just happened. And the man with the thin folder at the far end of the dais had just listened to every word of it with his hands folded and his expression entirely unchanged. Rubio's turn came 38 minutes into the hearing, after 3 other committee members had questioned the witness and received responses that were fluid, detailed, and entirely consistent with the framing she had established in her opening statement. In those 38 minutes, she had been precise, confident, and completely in command of every exchange. She had expanded friendly questions into substantive statements about grassroots fundraising democracy. She had deflected adversarial questions with practiced efficiency and occasional sharpness. She had maintained the specific energy of someone who arrived knowing exactly what she wanted this hearing to produce and has found nothing so far to suggest it will produce anything different. When the chairman indicated that Senator Rubio had the floor, Rubio allowed 2 full seconds to pass before he moved toward his microphone. Not dramatically, not for effect. The specific 2 seconds of a man who has decided that his pace today will be his pace and no one else's. "Congresswoman," he said, his voice carrying the particular evenness of someone who has removed all performative elements from every syllable on purpose, "thank you for being here. You mentioned in your opening statement that every filing has been submitted on time and every disclosure has been made, and that your campaign committee and affiliated political action committees have operated in full compliance with federal election law." He looked at the folder. He did not open it yet. "I want to confirm something before I ask my questions. You said that. Those were your words. Full compliance. Every filing submitted, every disclosure made. Is that an accurate summary of what you said? That is correct, she said, immediately, confidently, with the ease of someone confirming a fact they have stated so many times it requires no processing. Good, Rubio said. He opened the folder. I want to work through something specific with you this morning. And I want to be clear from the beginning that I am working entirely from your own filings. Every document I have in this folder is an official FEC submission bearing your campaign's identification number. I did not obtain anything from opposition research. I did not obtain anything from partisan sources. Everything I am going to read to you this morning, you submitted yourself. He removed the first page. Stay with me, because what Rubio just established in 60 words is the single most important foundation any accountability hearing can build. He told her, and he told the room, and he told the 43 million people who will eventually watch this footage that every number he is about to read came from her own hand, from her own filings, submitted by her own committee. That foundation makes everything that comes after it impossible to characterize as partisan attack, because you cannot call your own filing a partisan attack. Subscribe right now if you want to understand by the end of this video why that 60-word setup was as important as anything else that happened in that room this morning. I want to start with your principal campaign committee, Rubio said, his voice level and unhurried as he looked at the page. Your campaign committee reported total receipts of $47,320,000 across the most recent complete 2-year election cycle. Is that figure consistent with your understanding of your campaign's fundraising? Ocasio-Cortez reached for her own materials. That is approximately correct, yes. Of that 47 million, Rubio continued, your filings show that 63% came from itemized contributions of $200 or less, small dollar donors by the standard definition. Correct, she said. That is the grassroots fundraising model I described in my opening statement. 63% from small dollar donors, Rubio repeated, writing something on his legal pad. And you have described your fundraising model publicly, in speeches and in interviews and in social media content, as fundamentally a small dollar grassroots democracy model. That characterization appears in your own fundraising solicitation language. Is that a fair description of how you have presented this to your donors? That is accurate. Good, Rubio turned a page. I want to shift to your affiliated political action committee, the Justice and Progress PAC, which your filings identify as a leadership PAC under your direction. The PAC reported total receipts of $31,800,000 across the same 2-year cycle. He looked up at her. Of that $31,800,000, what percentage came from small dollar donors giving $200 or less? A pause. The first pause of any substance in her participation in the session. The PAC has a different donor composition than the principal campaign committee, she said. Leadership PACs traditionally draw from a broader donor base. I understand that, Rubio said pleasantly. I am asking about the percentage. Your filing breaks out the contribution categories. Do you know the percentage from small dollar donors for the PAC? She looked at her materials. I would need to review the specific filing to give you a precise figure. Of course, Rubio said. I have it here. He looked at the page. According to your PAC's FEC filing for the same period, 11% of total PAC receipts came from itemized contributions of $200 or less. 11%. He set the page on the table. So your principal campaign committee, which you describe publicly as a grassroots small dollar democracy model, received 63% of its funds from small dollar donors. And your affiliated PAC, operating under your direction and described in your own fundraising materials using the same grassroots democratic language, received 11% from small dollar donors. He looked at her directly. That is a 52 percentage point difference between the public description and the donor composition of the PAC. The room absorbed this the way rooms absorb the placement of a specific, concrete number in a specific, concrete context, not with drama, with the particular quality of attention that emerges when something that was abstract becomes measurable. Type percentage in the comments right now, because 63% and 11% are both in the same official filing, submitted by the same committee, under the same candidate's name. And the fundraising language that was used to solicit both pools of money used the same grassroots democratic framing. Ocasio-Cortez's response was organized and immediate. She had expected this territory. She cited the structural differences between principal campaign committees and leadership PACs under federal election law. She cited the different regulatory frameworks governing each. She cited the legitimate and legal uses of leadership PAC funds for supporting allied candidates and party infrastructure. She noted that the donor composition of a leadership PAC reflects its different structural purpose rather than any inconsistency in fundraising values. She was doing what her preparation had equipped her to do, providing a comprehensive and technically accurate account of why the two different entities have different donor compositions under federal law, which is true, and which is the answer to a question about legal structure rather than the question Rubio had asked, which was about the alignment between fundraising language and fundraising reality. All of that is accurate, Rubio said when she finished. Leadership PACs are a legitimate structure, and the regulatory differences you described are real. He paused. My question is not about the legal structure. My question is about the fundraising language. He looked at the page. I have here 3 direct mail solicitations and 2 email solicitations sent to donors under your name during the period covered by these filings. These are in the public record through the FEC's public communications database. He removed a second page. Each of these solicitations uses language that I am going to read directly. Join our grassroots movement. This campaign is funded by people like you, not by corporate PACs or special interests. Your small dollar contribution is what makes this possible. He set the page down. Each of these solicitations, which used that language, directed donor responses to a contribution platform that split contributions between your principal campaign committee and the Justice and Progress PAC based on an allocation formula embedded in the platform's terms of service. He looked at her. Donors who responded to language telling them they were joining a grassroots movement funded by people like them were in several cases contributing to a PAC that receives 11% of its money from small dollar donors and 89% from large contributors. He folded his hands. Did your fundraising solicitations disclose that split allocation to donors before they contributed? The pause this time was longer. 4 seconds. In a room with every camera in Washington running, 4 seconds of silence from a witness who has just confirmed that every filing has been made and every disclosure has been provided is not a pause. It is a space in which a specific question is existing without an answer, and everyone in the room can feel that absence. The contribution platform's terms of service disclose the allocation methodology in accordance with FEC regulations, she said carefully. In the terms of service, Rubio said, not in the solicitation language. The disclosure was made in compliance with applicable regulations. I understand it was compliant, Rubio said. I am asking whether a donor who received an email saying this campaign is funded by people like you, not by corporate PACs, and then contributed through the platform would have understood, before contributing, that a portion of their contribution was going to a PAC that receives 89% of its funds from large contributors. She looked at her materials, then at the table, then at her materials again. The platform's disclosure language meets the federal standard for contribution allocation notification, she said. That is the 3rd time you have told me it was compliant, Rubio said, without any edge in his voice whatsoever. Simply the observation of a man noting a pattern he has been watching develop. I believe you. I am not questioning compliance. I am asking a different question. He paused. Did the donors understand where their money was going? Share this video right now with one person who has ever donated to a political campaign based on the language in the fundraising email. Because that question, did the donors understand where their money was going, is the question that every person who has ever given $25 to a movement they believed in deserves to have answered clearly. The moment that followed was the one that every political analyst who has reviewed this footage has returned to multiple times, not because of what she said, because of what preceded the saying. Because of the 3 seconds between Rubio's question and her response in which something happened in her face that the high-definition cameras positioned directly across the witness table captured with a completeness that left nothing to interpretation. Her eyes moved, not dramatically, not with the visible, theatrical quality of someone losing their composure in a way that reads as weakness, with the specific, involuntary movement of eyes that have just processed a question for which the preparation does not have a ready answer and are moving through the available inventory of responses to locate the one that fits. It is a movement that experienced political observers recognize immediately because it is rare. In 7 years of watching her testify and speak and debate in high-stakes settings, this specific eye movement had not appeared in any previous footage that her critics or her supporters had compiled. Then her hands moved. Off the table, into her lap, out of frame of the cameras covering the witness table directly. the involuntary repositioning of hands that have been anchored to the table as part of the physical posture of confidence and are no longer performing that function. 3 seconds. Then she spoke. The fundraising program was designed to maximize grassroots participation within a structure that also builds the broader electoral infrastructure necessary to advance progressive priorities across multiple races and levels of government, she said. Small dollar donors who contribute to that program are contributing to a movement, not just to a single campaign. The PAC supports allied candidates and party-building efforts that reflect the values the donors are investing in. It was a real answer. It was a substantive answer. It was the answer that her preparation had assembled for this territory. But it was the answer to the question of whether the PAC's work serves progressive values, not the answer to the question of whether the donors who received emails saying their money would not go to corporate PACs understood that their money was going to a PAC that receives 89% of its funds from large contributors. Rubio waited. He let her answer exist in the room by itself for a full 3 seconds. Then he said, very quietly, "Congresswoman, where did 50% of the PAC donations go?" 8 seconds. The broadcast footage has been reviewed by every political correspondent who covers campaign finance, and the count is consistent. 8 seconds from the end of that question to the first word of her response. 8 seconds in which the hearing room held a quality of silence that its own acoustics had not produced at any previous point in the morning. The woman in the third row of the gallery who had been nodding throughout the opening statement was not nodding. She was looking at the table in front of the witness with the expression of someone trying to read something from a distance. The aide seated to Ocasio-Cortez's left had her pen on the notepad but was not moving it. A reporter in the second row had set his phone face down on the press table. He was watching without any mediation between himself and what he was seeing. The thin folder was still open on the dais in front of Rubio. He had not closed it. His hands were folded on top of it. His expression had not changed by any measurable degree from the expression he had been wearing since he sat down 46 minutes ago. Ocasio-Cortez looked at her materials. Her prepared responses were there. Every one of them. She had prepared for this hearing with the thoroughness that 7 years of high-profile political combat produces in a person. She had prepared for questions about PAC structure and donor composition and fundraising language and FEC compliance methodology. She had prepared for hostile framing and partisan characterization and the specific rhetorical moves that adversarial committee questioning typically employs. She had prepared for the argument. She had not prepared for the arithmetic, because the arithmetic was not an argument. It was a number, her own number, from her own filing, submitted by her own committee under her own identification number. And the question attached to it was the simplest question in the room. 7 words, placed at the end of 46 minutes of methodical, patient, document-by-document construction. Where did 50% of the PAC donations go? Type donors in the comments right now, because that is whose question it actually is. Not Rubio's question. The question of every person who gave $25 in response to an email that said their contribution was what made the grassroots movement possible. They are the ones waiting for the answer. And the 8 seconds of silence are 8 seconds of their waiting made audible. When she spoke with the controlled composure of someone who has not lost their voice, but has lost the particular relationship to the next sentence that makes speaking feel natural rather than constructed. The PAC's expenditure reports are in the public record, she said. Every disbursement is documented in the FEC filings. The committee has been fully transparent about fund deployment. Rubio looked at the folder. He removed the final page. He placed it on the table and turned it so it was facing him and read from it for a moment in silence. Then he looked up. Your PAC's most recent expenditure report, which I have here, shows total disbursements of $31,200,000 across the covered period. Of that total, $14,600,000, which is approximately 46% of total disbursements, is categorized under the FEC reporting code for administrative and operating expenses. He set the page down. Administrative and operating expenses. He looked at her. Can you tell me what is included in that category? Administrative and operating expenses cover the operational costs of running a political action committee, she said. Staff compensation, office expenses, technology infrastructure, compliance costs, vendor payments for operational services. Staff compensation, Rubio said. Technology infrastructure, vendor payments. He paused. Does that category include payments to political consulting firms? A pause. Consulting services that support the PAC's operations may be categorized under administrative expenses. Yes, I see, Rubio said. And does it include payments to companies with which members of your political circle have financial relationships? She looked at him directly. All vendor relationships are disclosed in the filings and all payments are made at arm's length on a competitive basis. The filing shows, Rubio said, consulting the page, a payment of $1,200,000 to a digital consulting firm called Progressive Infrastructure Partners, LC, over the covered period. That firm was incorporated 18 months before the first payment was made. Its registered principals include 2 individuals who served on your campaign's digital team in the previous cycle. He set the page down. $1,200,000 to a company run by former campaign staff, categorized as administrative expense, paid from donations that were solicited with language describing a grassroots movement funded by people like the donors. He folded his hands on the table. I am not telling you that is illegal. I have reviewed the filing and the relevant regulations, and the payment structure appears to meet the technical requirements for disclosure. He looked at her. I am telling you that a small dollar donor who gave $25 because they received an email saying their contribution would fund a movement of people like them would probably not have expected that their contribution would help pay, through an allocation to a PAC, a 6-figure consulting contract to a company started by your former campaign staff. He paused. And my question remains on the table. Where did 50% of the PAC donations go? The room was very still, not the managed stillness of a formal proceeding. The actual stillness of a space in which a number has been placed on the table, and the question attached to it has now been asked 3 times without receiving an answer that addresses the number. He just placed the final page on the table, closed the folder, set his hands on top of it. And for the first time in 48 minutes, he stopped speaking and simply waited. That is the moment. Right there. Stay. Ocasio-Cortez drew a breath. She had been in hostile rooms before. She had survived hostile rooms that were considerably more overtly aggressive than this one. She reached for the tool that had served her reliably in every previous difficult room: the reframe, the pivot to the larger argument, the movement from the specific to the structural that places the specific question in a context designed to change its meaning. Senator Rubio, she said, her voice taking on the quality she uses when she has decided to reframe the terms of an exchange, I want to address something directly. The line of questioning you are pursuing is designed to create the impression that progressive campaign finance structures are uniquely problematic. But every leadership PAC operated by every member of this body, Republican and Democratic alike, uses the same administrative expense categories and the same vendor structures and the same contribution allocation methodologies that you are now characterizing as inconsistent with my public statements. She leaned forward slightly. The difference between my PAC and the leadership PACs operated by members of the Republican caucus is not structural. It is political. And I think the American people deserve to understand that this hearing is being used to apply a standard of scrutiny to progressive fundraising that has never been applied with the same intensity to the PAC structures of the members who are doing the scrutinizing. It was a real argument. It was a substantive argument. And it had the specific quality that her best arguments always have, which is that it contains a genuine truth. Leadership PAC structures are broadly similar across both parties, and the administrative expense categories she described are used by virtually every leadership PAC in Washington. Rubio let the argument complete its full journey through the room. He allowed the silence after it to hold for 4 seconds. Then he said, "That is a fair point. And if any member of this subcommittee would like to invite me to apply the same line of questioning to their own PAC filings, I will do it. Gladly. Next week if they want." He paused. "But right now, in this room, the witness before this committee is you, and the filing before this committee is yours, and the fundraising language before this committee is yours, and the donors who gave $25 because they read that language are the people whose money is in this filing." He looked at her directly. "And I still have not received an answer to my question. The moral authority argument had met the filing. The filing had not moved. Where did 50% of the PAC donations go?" The 4th time. The same 7 words. The same patient, level delivery. In 48 minutes of questioning, Rubio had not raised his voice by a single decibel, had not used a contemptuous word, had not characterized her motives or her integrity or her values. He had read numbers from her filings and asked the question that the numbers produced. Send this video to one person tonight who has ever given money to a political cause based on language about grassroots democracy and would like to know what the filing says about where that money went. Not because the answer is necessarily what the worst interpretation suggests, but because the question deserves an answer, and the donors deserve to hear it. 6 seconds of silence this time. Shorter than the first freeze, but in some ways more telling. Because the first freeze happened before the full architecture of the filing had been laid out on the table. This freeze happened after. After the administrative expense category. After the $1,200,000 payment to the consulting firm started by former campaign staff. After the fourth repetition of the same 7-word question. After the 4 opportunities to answer had come and gone and produced everything except the 7-word answer. She looked at the table. Her prepared remarks were there, untouched since the opening statement. When she spoke, her voice had not lost its clarity. She is too skilled for that. But it had lost the specific quality that had characterized it from the first word of her opening statement. The forward-leaning certainty of someone moving toward an inevitable outcome they have already determined. It was still her voice. It was still controlled. But it was no longer the voice of someone pressing forward. It was the voice of someone standing at the boundary of what their preparation had equipped them to say. The PAC's expenditures are fully documented in the public record, she said. Every disbursement, every vendor relationship, every administrative cost. The filings are available to any donor or any member of the public who wishes to review them. Rubio nodded once. The specific single nod of someone who has been noting things all morning and has just noted one more thing. They are, he said. I have been reading from them for the past 50 minutes. He looked at her steadily. The donors can review the filings. That is true. But the question I am asking is whether the fundraising language that preceded the donation gave those donors reason to look at the filing. Whether someone who received an email telling them their contribution was funding a grassroots movement of people like them would have had reason to know that they should review the administrative expense category of a leadership PAC before contributing. He paused. Because if they did not have reason to know to look, the fact that the information is technically available does not resolve the question of whether they understood where their money was going. He removed his glasses. He folded them. He placed them on top of the closed folder with the quiet finality of a man who has completed the work he came to do. I have asked you 4 times where 50% of the PAC donations went. You have told me 4 times that the filings are compliant and the information is available in the public record. I believe both of those things are true. He looked at her. But compliant and transparent are not the same thing, and available and understood are not the same thing. And the people who gave $25 because they read that language deserve more than the information being technically available in a federal database that requires a specific search methodology to navigate. He folded his hands on the folder. That is the record. The committee chairman cleared his throat and formally invited the witness to make any additional statement she wished to place in the record. She looked at her prepared remarks. She looked at the microphone. She looked at the folder on Rubio's side of the dais, the one that was now closed, the final page resting inside it, the numbers that had been read from it still existing in the room in the specific way that numbers exist after they have been read aloud in a room with cameras, permanently, immovably, beyond the reach of any subsequent reframing. I stand by the integrity of my fundraising program, she said. The grassroots small-dollar donors who have supported this work have funded a movement that has changed the conversation in Washington. Their contributions matter. Their investment in this work matters. And I will continue to fight for the transparent, accountable, people-powered politics that they deserve. It was not wrong. It was not dishonest. The movement she described is real. The donors are real. The work they funded is real. But the question of where 50% of the PAC donations went had been asked 4 times and had not received an answer that addressed the 50%. The chairman thanked both parties. The gavel came down. Type answer in the comments. Because that is what the question is still waiting for. Not from this hearing, which is now closed, but from the public record that the filing exists in, and that the donors have the right to review, and that the next journalist or the next oversight proceeding or the next committee chairman has the right to open and read aloud in a room where the reading has consequences. In an apartment in Astoria, Queens, a woman named Patricia, who had donated to Ocasio-Cortez's campaign in 4 consecutive cycles, sat at her kitchen table and watched the replay of the hearing on her laptop. She had given $25 in the most recent cycle. She had given it in response to an email that used the language Rubio had read aloud, the language about the grassroots movement, the language about people like her. She watched the 8-second freeze. She watched it twice. Then she sat for a long time without moving. She was not angry. She was something more complicated than angry. The specific complexity of someone who believed in something and is now asking the question of whether the thing she believed in was exactly what it was described to be. Not because the answer is necessarily no, but because the question, which had always been available to ask, had now been asked in public with her money as one of the numbers in the filing. And she had not known, when she gave the $25 in response to the language about the grassroots movement, that her contribution was one of the contributions in the filing that had produced the administrative expense category with the six-figure payment to the company started by former campaign staff. She did not call anyone. She did not post about it. She opened a new browser tab and navigated to the PAC public search database and typed in the PAC name and sat in her kitchen in Astoria reading the filing for the first time. The information had always been available. Rubio was right about that. It was available in the database. It was technically accessible to any donor who knew to look and knew what to look for and knew how to navigate the PAC search interface and knew which filing covered which period and knew what the administrative expense category contained. She had not known any of those things. She had known that she gave $25 because the email said the grassroots movement needed people like her. And now she was reading the filing at 11:30 at night in her kitchen in Queens and learning what the administrative expense category contained. Send this video to one person tonight. Just one. The person in your life who has ever given money to a movement because the language made them feel like their contribution mattered. Not because the answer to the question is necessarily the worst possible interpretation, but because the question exists. And it was asked 4 times in a room with cameras. And the filing is public. And Patricia in Astoria is reading it right now. And she deserves the same access to the answer that every official statement of compliance has been describing as technically available for 14 months. The clip of the 8-second freeze and the 4 unanswered repetitions of the 7-word question ran on every major financial news network within 2 hours of the hearing's conclusion. By midnight, it had been viewed 22 million times. The PAC public search database experienced a traffic volume that night that was 14 times its normal daily average for PAC-related searches. The search term that drove the majority of that traffic was the name of the Justice and Progress PAC. The donors were looking. The information had always been available. Now they knew to look for it. Rubio's office issued no statement, no press release, no social media post, no follow-up commentary. The folder was closed. The questions were in the record. The filing was in the database. The donors were navigating to it. Sometimes the most consequential thing a hearing produces is not the answer. It is the directing of the right people toward the place where the answer has been sitting all along, in a federal database, in a public filing, in an administrative expense category, waiting for someone to read it aloud in a room where the reading has consequences. The 7-word question is still on the record. Where did 50% of the PAC donations go? Thank you for being here through every minute of this breakdown. Subscribe to this channel right now if you want to see more analysis like this one. Because the hearings that matter most for the people who fund American politics with their $25 contributions are not always the ones that generate the most political coverage. But they are always the ones that Patricia in Astoria, navigating the PAC database at 11:30 at night, deserve to have someone ask in a room where the asking had consequences. Type answer in the comments below. I read every single one. And send this to one person tonight, just one, who has ever given money to a cause based on the language in the email and would like to know what the filing says about where it went.